line, and we'll establish quorum.
Oh, my name.
Yep.
I don't think we've done that.
Name for the record.
Brian Leggett.
Rick Ware.
Jeff Bennett.
Doug Zerbel.
Cameron Parrish.
Anna Dukes.
All right. Meeting's officially called to order. We have quorum. So we have minutes from February 6th. Anyone want to make a motion to accept those?
I have read the minutes and motion to accept.
Second. Second. All in favor? Any opposed? All right, carried. All right, next on the agenda is an update from John.
All right. Don't really have anything prepared for you guys, but thank y'all for being here, and I'll probably answer some questions. I guess quick overview, it's not just really much a council update, just things going on overall, is we do have a music festival coming up, and then we'll be starting outside on the Avenue event, so we'll have some more activity, business perspective in town. I guess council-wise, the biggest thing we're working on right now is the Kiwi Trail development and moving that forward from first reading to second reading. And really, do you guys have any questions of me right now? That's probably what I'd kind of...
Yeah, when's the music festival?
The dates on that?
19th.
19th and 20th. I looked at it before I came, Rick, but I'm getting too old to remember if I don't write it down.
Not this Saturday, but next.
Yep. So we got good acts coming into town, a lot of excitement. It's our first one, so you kind of hope this is something as a springboard to learn from and grow into future events. So a lot of excitement around there. But, downtown project, I didn't ask where we are with that before I got here, but I know.
We just finished the final asbestos.
Step up to the podium.
Yep, sorry. So the downtown where the old planning code's building, the street area.
In the
around there.
streetscape from 93 to North Clemson. The project is, so because we used a grant to acquire the funds to help match for that project, we're having to go through our final environmental. Basically, we say that we put it out that, hey, these are our findings for our environmental review. So we've completed our phase 2. We've done an asbestos report for the building. There was a little bit of asbestos in the ceiling, which I don't think anyone's super surprised by. But, and then, so we're going through that process right now. We're hoping to get that out by the end of the week. So it has to be posted, I think, for 3 weeks. Once it's posted, we'll actually be able to start going through our award process. So we have selected, so we've not selected, but we've not awarded. So we've not done any choice limiting decisions, which means that we haven't actually given a contract or signed a contract with any consultant at this point. So we've gone through, we put the RFQ out, we went through the process. We're in the initial phases of discussing contracts with the two. So there's Seaman Whiteside for the street as the apparent selected proposer for the streetscape, and then Hogan along with Ms. MPS, which is Masden. I always forget the P. Smith. Yeah. For the architect. So both of those are the parent award winners, but we have to go through the environmental process before we're actually allowed to place that. So once we do that, we'll come to council for award of those projects for the design portion of that, and have some more update from there.
And that's been a long time coming, and I'm going to ask you one more thing while you're up here, and we're up here. Sloan Street parking.
That's the next topic.
Sorry, I didn't read down the agenda, so, yeah. Y'all have any questions for me from the council perspective?
And I guess we're going to come back to it when we talk about number 6. Is that right? No? I thought
It's not.
Okay, gotcha.
That's not specific. I think that's more general in terms of that area.
Okay.
All right.
Very good. Thanks, John. Thanks, John. All right, Nathan, update on parking.
Yeah, so the employee parking, we've had a community meeting, so community informational meeting, March 19th. That took our design from kind of just located at what I would say is between Edgewood and Shorecrest for the Sloan Street portion, and they've kind of asked us to expand the scope of that project a little bit. So we're in the process of kind of fine-tuning some of our design processes before we have a final community information meeting for the Shorecrest neighborhood. So that's going to kind of be a follow-up that we're going to create. The biggest things that kind of came out of that is, if you remember, initially we had the one-way going from Edgewood, so from downtown toward Shorecrest. They kind of asked us to switch that around and possibly extend that one-way all the way to kind of the intersection at the bottom from the light. So where if you were at Edgewood, you could turn right on Shortgrass or turn left onto Edgewood, and it kind of, there's a stop sign. Having it the one-way start at that corner right there. So we're kind of working through the details of that right now, fine-tuning the design, making sure that everything works and allows for EMS to travel, but otherwise we're hoping to schedule that meeting here in early May for the Shortgrass residents.
So you're going in one way all the way down to where Ameriprise is?
No, yeah, yes. So starting at Amerivise and going all the way to Edgewood.
That was the recommendation of the request that came out of the neighborhood meeting.
And what we're kind of waiting on now is they did ask us to at least look at, so we're doing a traffic study along Sloan to see which is the majority direction travel at this point. So we're looking at that to kind of weigh our decisions when we look at the project. Any questions?
The
No.
kiosks for downtown, when do those get installed?
Those are going to be installed probably in the next 6 weeks. They're here. They were here and now they've been taken back to the company that's going to install them to program them. The hold up, or I won't even say hold up, where we are now is the back end training for the kiosk and the informational campaign that will need to happen prior to going live with it. So we are being very purposeful about how we roll this out.
And I know part of the reason the revenue generated from these kiosks is supposed to help us have increased parking enforcement downtown.
Yes.
Are there interviews? Are there prospects?
Yes, it is open and we are accepting applications right now.
Okay.
Yes.
For a start date, new parking officers' start date would
As
be?
soon as we can hire them.
Okay.
And then is the plan for the actual startup of this operation to be summerish?
Yes,
When they're-
like after graduation.
After graduation.
So that it can be a kind of a soft
Right.
rollout.
Work out the bugs
For
during the summer.
yes, for the people who will be dealing with the machines and for our residents and visitors, for both sides.
And how many parking enforcement officer positions have been green-lighted to hire
We have 2 full-time positions.
in addition to,
No, we have 2 full-time positions.
so we're,
The request, there's discussion of adding or requesting a additional part-time enforcement position.
and has because we had talked about possibly having some Saturday enforcement and some possibly a little later in the evening enforcement. Does the job description for this new position cover that, or are we gonna, do we need to make a recommendation to council that perhaps we need yet a?
I think that they would understand that that's the potential. To expand enforcement hours, like regularly to expand them, if you wanted to extend, or the recommendation, you wanted to make a recommendation to 6 p.m. or to include Saturdays, that would need to be a formal recommendation coming out of this.
So is there, and I'm not putting you on the spot, I just don't know, and I'm wondering about, is there someone in the city within HR or another department that would say, okay, we need 2 bodies on this if we get 37 and a half to 40 hours a week from these 2 individuals, yet these are the number of hours that we want parking enforcement to be covered. Do we have enough manpower to cover said hours? Is there someone who kind of does that?
It
You know
is
what I'm
an
saying?
argument that is made during our budget process.
Right.
And it is discussed and it is requested.
Okay.
And then as we move through the budget process and or the powers that be
Okay.
do the calculations and we're working towards a balanced budget, if there is money in the budget, then if there is an additional employee, if the request is for an additional employee, then that is when that happens. So all the departments have made request for if they need for the various positions that they feel like they need covered.
And so would the recommendation of this committee be, we need X more hours covered, and then that gets tossed over to the city to figure out how to fill those hours? Or do we say something as specific as, no, we need another parking attendant?
I think those are two different things. I think that by virtue of requesting extended enforcement hours would require us to look at coverage. So I don't think that it would necessarily.
So educate us on what is it that we're currently going to do with once we put these new meters in? What is the coverage time frame? What is the plan?
The coverage hasn't changed. It is Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. It will include the on-street parking, as it always has. Game day Saturdays will be special event rates so you will pay for game day Saturdays.
On the street?
On street.
Wow, okay.
Everywhere downtown will pay. And then the idea now is that it'll be a staggered shift where someone comes in at 8, works until 4, and then you've got someone who comes 9 to 5, so that there's 2 people downtown, which is why I do not disagree that we need more enforcement, because we need 2 people downtown now just for the expansion of enforcement areas.
Well, and just for coverage, I mean, it's.
And so I am telling you that the request is in the budget.
Okay. The request for one additional person or the request for additional hours covered?
The additional person is already in this budget
Okay.
that we're in. We went through this process earlier in the fiscal year, and it didn't shake out like we didn't find a viable candidate.
Okay.
We are actively looking for
again.
someone now. And then there's a request for another one.
And
Fiscal year.
how's game day parking going to be managed? Is that first come, first serve?
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
On street, but for the parking garage, it's.
First come, first served.
Oh, really?
We're
Oh, I thought you had to reserve it.
We're eliminating the reserved
Okay.
leased parking.
What time do you expect people to show up? Because I could see people showing up at midnight, just like we did in college, just to get tickets.
There's a prohibition against on-street parking at certain hours already.
Yeah, you're not, you
'Cause
can't
of street
be in
cleaning.
Right.
you
So
can't
it's
be on
before
street
7.
or in deck between 4 and 7 a.m. So
Okay,
7
7
a.m. would be the
o'clock.
earliest that you could come in, that you wouldn't
It's not enforced.
get ticketed, and the meters will be set up to accept payment at 7 a.m.
No,
So it's still metered, but it's game day metered.
Yeah.
You pay one rate for
on special event game day metering, will they be able to purchase enough for them to go to the game, or?
It'll be a flat rate.
Okay.
So
For the whole day?
So if you come in and that is my recommendation, that is how I see it, is that it is a flat rate, yes. You go in and you pay, and if you're there for an hour, if you're there for 7 hours, you're gonna pay the same amount.
I'll be interested to see that because we've got some stealth campers that hang out now.
Do we know what the rate's going to be yet?
We do not.
Sorry, didn't mean to strain you at the podium.
We've got a new toy to play with, and we got to figure out how to throw it.
So I think, it sounds like to me an action item out of that for the committee is going to be, we need to make a recommendation on, well, first we need to look at how many hours
Yeah.
coverage do we
There's
have?
more than even what you said. So one is we have a no overnight thing that we're not enforcing. Are we going
Right.
to choose to enforce? That's one. 2 is the extending of the hours during the week, which will get away from this, because the students are still going to come back from class and they're going to park at 5 and they're good.
Right.
So we haven't solved that issue unless we extend the hours to some rate, right? And then then I think the third component is the other thing you were going after.
Well, that's part of it is, and it's all part and parcel of what you just said, like parking at, let's say they park at 7 PM on a Friday, right? And I show up Saturday morning at 7 AM to early, and every parking spot is full around downtown, yet no businesses are open. Well, those are folks who park Friday night, and technically, as it stands right now, they don't have to move them until Monday morning after the first round of tire chalking happens, which could be 10 AM. So that part has not yet been solved.
Right.
And then how many hours coverage do we need? And then how many hours, because we only have 80 hours right now, it sounds like 2 full-time people. There's more than 80 hours of coverage, I think, especially if we do overlap. I think we need to give that number to council, like, we think this is the number of hours coverage we need. Don't you think?
I think, I'm going to recommend we do a little side
Yeah,
conversation.
okay.
Working session. So we can capture that, Lindsay, is a working session. We'll invite.
Is there anybody in HR who might be able to assist us if they could?
Well, we went through a realignment and a restructuring of departments here earlier, the end of the year. And parking has been moved to the Planning and Development Office. So Nathan.
You're so lucky.
Is now parking czar. We have, with the transition, we've not, like we're in the middle of the getting the kiosk onboarded and installed, and so it's like I can't just hand it over. And so we've been working together to try and make this like not just foisted upon him, but at the same time get some traction with someone that can focus on this. So Nathan and a couple of people from his department would definitely need to be a part of the work session.
Work session.
And just throwing this out there, have we ever invested in, I know you're new to the parking czar role, has the city ever investigated, and this can be for mayor or city council, having an outside contractor come in, like I'm gonna date myself here, but you remember Crow's Security that used to do parking on campus? Has the city ever, is that even a viable thing to even talk about? No.
We've not discussed anything. I mean, when I started and started doing parking, it was when Roger was here, and that was all you needed.
Yeah.
That's a lot has changed since then. And in terms of the work session, it isn't. I don't think it's as much about HR as it is about council understanding that there are positions that need to be funded. It's the funding, it isn't the HR. So it's like give money.
Oh, because I thought one of the challenges was actually finding viable candidates.
Well, that is, but I mean, but.
And I was just thinking that an outside contractor, like if
yeah.
we say the kiosks, we've generated $600,000 in revenue for the kiosks, right? And we go out and do requests for quotes for companies that might do this for municipalities or for corporations or for schools or whatever, and say we need this many bodies, whatever, and have them quoted and see how that jives with the revenue we bring in from the kiosk. Is that something that we could talk about, or?
Well, my suggestion is that
are we chasing windmills there?
We move this to a work session,
Okay.
and we can talk about all that. I think that that's something we could look
Right,
into.
because I think there's some
and-
anticipation of improved labor efficiency because you've got a kiosk that tells you which ones are
Right.
expired, and so.
So let's circle back to scheduling
Even if
a
it
work
just
session.
augments, right? You have a private contractor handle weekends or something.
At
But
the end of the meeting, let's circle back to picking a date for a work session.
Okay.
and let's move
Sometime
on to
between
this.
now and the next EDEC meeting.
Okay.
One quick question, what bucket does all of that, so what bucket does the salaries come from, and what bucket does all the revenue that's generated go in?
Parking has its own fund.
So it'll have its own, those salaries come out of the parking, so in essence, the parking is to support the salaries. Got it. And if there's any extras in there, what is that used for?
It sits for capital improvements.
Got it.
We have about $70,000 worth of work that needs to be done on the parking deck this year.
Right.
So
Okay.
it stays there.
Okay, we good?
Okay.
Awesome. Look forward to that work session. Nathan, you were done?
Unless y'all have more questions.
All right. Any questions for Nathan?
Excellent.
Awesome. Point 6, mixed-use developments. And how's that? Nathan, Jacob?
We're going to tag team.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Floor is yours.
floor is yours. What do you
Yeah, so
want to
why
know?
don't you give Nathan a brief, recap of why I invited him here, based on the conversation that was had at the last EDAC meeting. I gave him an overview, but
Yeah, go ahead. I
he's
didn't want
here
to
to
stand up here
answer
and ask why I'm here.
questions.
So.
They're here to answer questions that were generated from the last meeting that I didn't know the answers to, and that, just some basic, how did we get here and all that, so.
Well, there were a number of questions, and I'll try to summarize, and maybe you guys can all jump in and provide some color. But when they're proposed, there are some requirements that we as a city have on the developer to include elements of retail, elements of parking, height restrictions maybe, size restrictions perhaps. What is the process that the city planning department goes through to evaluate these properties for whether they fit within the kind of the realm of where we're headed? That was one element. Another was, and this is where we have some questions as an economic development perspective, is how do we entice businesses to be able to come into some of these spaces if there are business spaces like there are, because they're vacant. They're the last ones to fill unless somebody has some lucrative idea to come in and kind of take advantage of that. It's so cost prohibitive from a build out standpoint, and maybe there's some things we can do as a city to make that either more amenable to an investor that wants to build a business, or maybe place some additional burdens on the developer so that some funds are set aside in an escrow kind of a thing. From that standpoint, from the startup, what does it take for me to get this thing going perspective? And then another is how we maybe zone them from a tax standpoint. So Cameron, because we both have different businesses. Cameron's got a business and he owns his building and he pays real estate taxes on it. I'm in a mixed-use development and I pay taxes for the space that I occupy based on my triple net lease that is very much tied to the value of the apartments, not necessarily the value of my business, right? So as an example, the tax portion of my annual common area maintenance fee as part of triple net has doubled in 5 years, whereas Cam's has maybe stayed the same or maybe gone down a little bit based on valuation, but actually probably went up. Anyway, I'm just using the two as an example, and so that kind of opens up a can of worms around what is it that we as a city can do, or what is it we can recommend to help with from the standpoint of how these things are devised and then how they end up at the end of the day. Sure. So those were a couple of perspectives that we kind of chewed on last time. Did I?
And when our mixed use developments, and obviously there's some things that many municipalities, us included, no accommodations on ground level because it ends up bad for the street. And so we've required retail space or business space on the bottom, but that's the perceived problem from the population, is that why are we doing this when no one's in these spaces? So is it time for us to look at our mixed-use development and say, we can have something else on the ground floor?
Should it be parking?
Yeah, because when the citizen drives around, the citizen that is concerned about it, they drive around and they say, and they all point, hey, there is empty retail space at the bottom of this development, and you're now going to build a new development that's going to have empty retail space in it. Now, these are sometimes more perceived problems than actual problems, but is that something the city should address in zoning and planning?
All right, we're gonna hit all that. I will seize on perceived, though. I think that's the key word. My background's economic development. I did economic development for the state of Tennessee, and I did local economic development from a retail standpoint for a community that was probably of around 65,000 people. If I had the vacancy rate we had in Clemson, I would have been voted mayor. It is a perceived problem. The problem is that the spaces that are vacant are the most visible ones downtown. There's about 485 commercial/retail establishments in Clemson. Of 485, there's 35 vacancies, and those are December, January numbers, so I'm sure that's in flux, but it's in range, which gives you about 7.2. That's including things like the old bingo hall and places like that. So then if you really were to drill down further on what's in student housing developments, it'll pull that number down further to like 3 something. So it's definitely a perception problem. I'm not saying it's not, it's still a problem for sure. And I think what catastrophizes that in everyone's mind as well is that a lot of times when there are those vacancies that are very visible, they are vacant for a long time before they're filled, which goes to Doug's point of the top floors paying for it. It is not necessarily, I don't even believe it's necessarily a problem of attracting things. It is, a lot of times it's just the rent prices to get in there. And so I can tackle some of everything you said, suggestion-wise. I think we have some things in place to tackle a lot of what you were saying, but I'm gonna let Jacob go back to how we wound up with mixed use, and then I'll go to your points.
Yeah, I mean, so I think you guys kind of hit on it, was to have a vibrant downtown, you need to have commercial on the ground floor. You do not want residential if you are going to be a walking community, which is what, you know, everyone's saying that they want for the downtown. We do absolutely have standards for exactly like what you can do there, how much, so like what commercial depth you need to be at, how wide you have to be at. It's all very laid out in the ordinance. How much parking you need, what height you're allowed, setbacks, how big a building can be. That is all laid out there very clearly, and they're all adhered to it. You know, obviously, youth center is why everyone thinks that we have a vacancy problem downtown, because they went many, many years with having vacant. And that was because the landlord there was obsessed with having a single tenant take up the entire thing at a certain price in a long-term, you know, a national, basically, entity. So we had tons of people coming in, try to go in there, and they couldn't, you know, the landlord was the one who was not interested in them moving in. So that was, you know, that was a hard one, but now there's somebody going in, so we, you know, that kind of goes out. But if you look at 405 College, the last student housing development that just got built, they filled up right away. So I think there's 1 unit left around the corner there. So, you know, I think that probably helps dispel that whole image of that these student housings don't get filled, because that one was farther out and filled up very quickly. So, but yeah, there are absolutely standards for how much can be office down there for, like, you know, the office for the rental agency, how much of it could be, say, a gym, how much of it can, you know, what depth the different units can be. You know, we actually decreased some so you could have smaller units, because we were trying to, initially was every unit had to be 50 feet deep. And we heard these people coming in, there was, you know, the instance was there was a guy who wanted to do like a sunglass hut type thing in one of them. It never actually happened anyways, but he didn't want as much space. So we said, okay, well, we can have a variation of how much depth you need, as long as the, you know, the main corridor as you're walking by has that vibrant feel. We're okay with that. So it is something that we do always play around with and work with making better. But basically how we got to where we are is accepted planning practices. If you've ever been to any vibrant city, you know that what you want is commercial in your ground floor walking around.
Okay, so I'm gonna hit a couple things. However, while everything he says is true, for PDs, which we've been doing most of these developments, it's all a negotiation. So when you do a PD, differentiate that from standard zoning. So how much commercial's in there, the depth, everything he just mentioned becomes a negotiation between council, planning commission, and the developer of the project. So that's why you have seen some wide variations in what goes where. To some of Doug's points, so one of the things that's happened recently is in the last PDD that was approved, 408, 412 College, which should begin construction this summer. They included they wrote on their own accord in their PD ordinance to deliver a warm shell of the bottom floor, and they will actually, and I'm not gonna get the numbers right, they'll actually penalize themselves after a certain point to where they're paying the city a certain amount per month that set's vacant. Which is not something we asked for on the beginning, but when Jacob and I saw it in the ordinance, when they turned it in, we did jumping jacks and we're super happy about that. And it's something obviously we're copying going forward. The strongest version of that I've seen is the pending Kiwi Trail vote, where they offer a warm shell as well as $400,000 to certain tenants for an upfit. And then if it's the right tenant that they are looking for, they'll double that to $800,000. Now,
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
What does warm shell mean?
walls and
Climate control.
Floor,
HVAC.
HVAC,
Sorry,
toilets,
lights maybe.
lights you'll replace, but
Yeah.
lights.
Because, and Lindsay, the reasoning for that is we would hamstring tenants as well if we went ahead and had a developer go ahead and finish it out, because Doug's gonna come in and need pizza ovens and, Cameron's gonna need taps. It's different for whoever would go in there. So that's probably the strongest one I've seen. I don't know, I don't think we could ever require that strong in our regular zoning ordinance, but obviously the precedent that we could go forward in PDs.
That's something that we've been very interested. So like I said, we have conditional use standards, so all these things. Is there a way to make that a conditional use standard? Say that you have to bring it up to a warm shell level or pay a fee in lieu of to an escrow account. Because obviously, even going to a warm shell, we run into this issue all the times of where outlets are, where plumbing is. We go too far, we are just hamstringing ourselves into what we don't want to do. So like it's very, very tricky. So obviously the ideal situation is to say you are required to put a certain amount into escrow and just have it sit there.
Yeah.
We need to have that fleshed out if that's legal.
So does the tax calculation change? Because I remember there was a term that was floated around in some previous discussions called a glorified crawl space. That it basically had unfinished floor, bare concrete walls, no electrical, no plumbing. Maybe it has dry plumb, that kind of thing. But once you make it a warm shell, does it change the calculation on taxable square footage for the building? Or was it always that way, even with a gravel floor and concrete walls and no electrical? You understand what I'm saying? Does
I
it?
do understand what you're saying. I don't know the answer. I don't think it does, though.
No.
Yeah.
So once.
I didn't know if that would be the incentive to get a tenant in there, because now we're paying,
Yeah, I see
now it's being calculated at our property tax,
Yeah.
We can
Well,
double
what
check.
overwhelms all of that anyway, no matter what, an assessor comes in after you're done building whatever you're doing. But what overwhelms that more than anything is that all these guys are developers and they're building this place and they're gonna sell it to someone.
right?
And that new value becomes the taxable base, and your percentage of that taxable base is what's due, what you have to pay.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what that initial assessment is, because it's such a low, they're not even up to full taxes by the time they sell it.
That's probably what's keeping out the Sunglass Hut more so than the 50-foot setback.
Well, the biggest thing keeping the Sunglass Hut out is not having, what you just said is huge. It will help people come. Because none of that existed. The only reason I've got the kind of deals I got is because they need me, because the kids want pizza, right? But, the paint shop, and maybe the Cocoa Bowls, right? But
Right.
somebody else, you know, the developer's like, this is an investment for me. Is it worth it for me or not? And they'll never get that rent back, that 400,000. They'll never see that 400,000 from your pie, right? In the entire time they own it. So it's really about value and created value. But if you do this escrow thing, that's huge.
Yeah, and it goes back to what we were just talking about on the ground floor. Like, we need the businesses, and we hate vacancies probably more than you guys do, because we want the vibrant community. And like, I mean, I gotta be honest, like, I drove downtown last night, and it was crazy how many people were out last night. And yes, a lot of them were students, but there were a ton of people not students. I saw, you know, I don't want to guess anyone's age, but there were not students out there last night. So, and I, you know, I had the thought, you know, some of this stuff that's doomsday and is working. Like, downtown's, we got a vibrant downtown right now. And so, but yeah, I think that the escrow thing's a great thing. We do have to figure out the legalities on that, and it's something that our department's looking into. But I do think one of the things that's happening, and unfortunately for you, some of you guys, you've been here a long time, or you were early adopters into these buildings, but now that you're having the critical mass of some of this stuff, for instance, the situation that I just threw out about the 400,000, they're doing it for the same reasons that we're talking about. They want the vibrancy of it, and the same thing that you're talking about, to have somewhere for people to go, because essentially, you know, you have a captive audience in the building, and so they're less worried. This trend we're seeing is they're less worried about filling the space than filling it with the right tenant that creates vibrancy throughout the space. So I'm trying to think of.
Although we can't
There are certain places that are. Before you go, there are certain types of businesses. I'll just say vape shops that are not allowed in this new development. They've wrote that in their ordinance that they will not incentivize or allow a business like that. So those type things don't create the vibrancy that we're striving for. Yeah.
So maybe you guys don't know the answer to this question, but the other challenge for a small business that might be great at the time of inception from a volume and fixed cost perspective, but as taxes rise, you know, and I'll use Campus View as an example, $19,000 to build. And my first taxes were based on a percentage of that small number, you know, and I think the last sale was in almost double that, right? Almost 40 million, I'm sorry, was the last sale of that place. So my real estate didn't double, right? So is there a way to tax assess the retail space differently than the residential?
That really is your personal contract, though. That you're not paying. I'm sorry, you're not paying the taxes directly. You're paying as part of your lease agreement to the corporation who owns it, who is then paying it. Correct?
Right, but a standard triple net lease is going to be, what's your square footage? What's the square footage of the unit? What's the and what's the total bill, and multiply it out. It's a simple math equation. But, and I was smarter in Plan 2, right? But not, I mean, people don't realize that. And they're not even gonna be able to fulfill even if they signed a 5-year lease if the place sells, right? 3 times?
Well, that's a very interesting thing. It might be more of a financial literacy kind of teaching thing. Maybe there's some sort of packets we can have, because you can negotiate different contracts. Even triple net leases are not always exactly the same. Like the one we saw for 189, the Greenville Highway, was very different from like what I've seen on College Ave. But I mean, it might be a matter of trying to educate our businesses coming in, maybe the Chamber of Commerce or something, saying, hey, you got to realize that these things sell, and they sell on average every 3 years.
And as far as taxing it differently, like I think
We cannot.
we can't. I mean, that's probably a state thing. I have 2 bankers here that might be able to answer that. I don't know the answer, but I mean, I see your point, absolutely.
And then,
The tax assessment goes to the county, right?
That's correct.
It's not, the city doesn't come in and evaluate, this is the worthiness, or your house is worth this amount.
Right.
That is at the county level.
Yeah, but Doug's right, it just goes by the last sale in most of these cases.
Right, right.
And because these sales are going up so dramatically, I mean, when you sign the lease to the 3 years later when it goes sells again, I mean, that's gotta be dramatic. I can't imagine what that difference is, but it's big. I didn't even think of it.
And now I'm gonna go real wild and crazy on you. So the ideal business investment is to buy the shell
Right.
as a condo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that requires so much, meaning what does the city allow? What are the,
Absolutely nothing in the city that avoids it. Ownership has nothing to do with zoning. At any point, these properties can be condominiumized and zoning, and city would have no involvement. You would literally file the paperwork up to Pickens County and be done with it.
We've asked the question before. I'm just not sure that.
developers don't wanna do it.
They don't want to, and I don't know that anyone
What if
has.
you made them do it? Made
That is
them
a-
make it an option.
It is, well, we can make it an option, but the city's not allowed to force private contracts between individuals, so we cannot say you have to do it. We can have it absolutely as an option, but it would be illegal for us to say you must sell these off individually.
Come in and say, I have to sell my garage.
Yeah.
But see, that's how you differentiate the tax base. So
It would be.
okay,
It
you
is.
sell your building all you want.
And it's
I've got my
different states do different things. I mean, that's New York. That's why how you have New York City and some of those. No, those are good ideas. I don't know the answer to it, but
We can at least start bringing up the idea of condominiumizing, because a lot of times these student housing developers don't want to do the commercial end of it. That is not their bread and butter. If we could have some sort of, template we've already put in place saying, hey, if you condominiumize this commercial, we got people who will be willing to, because you're probably right, there's probably more businesses who want to buy these things than want to rent.
Well, I think along the lines of bringing things up, I think you can do that on the lease side as well. We talk about financial literacy, because my first thought went to negotiating it in the lease and at a reduced rate. But when they come in and approach the city,
Come on, the microphone will.
you don't think I'm loud enough?
Sorry.
When they come up and approach the city, I think too, as developments, we can also say, hey, when you're negotiating out these things, would you consider doing that too? So I just think we can kind of put that on our checklist also to mention, hey, we know that retail is not going to value as much as same concept, just applying it to the taxes.
We do not force rental housing landlords to use an example lease that we came up with, but we did give it as an example for them, because to help them, we were having a problem with these landlords who were saying, oh, I have no way to kick out these tenants. We're like, well, you can put it in your lease that if they do violations, you can kick them out. So again, we can kind of similar thing, just have a document that we can give to the developers and the potential things saying, hey, these are just some ideas that you can look at that will, certainly help us attract businesses and might help you to kind of stay out of the weeds.
Right.
And as we move forward, we're in a highly visible spot here. And as we move forward and we're getting some things that are beneficial to business in the last two planned developments, and then we have a leg to stand on to push for something further down the line.
Absolutely.
We can't
Precedents
call them, but precedence does help us out here. Because what we're faced with too is a perception problem, but someone says, well, you let them do it, so
correct.
I want to do it too.
Right.
And that's a real thing. And now if we just, some little tiny steps, the last two makes a big step for the third. But, we've had some public pushback in the town, and obviously the points that they're using in their mind is a perception problem, and they're valid, because I used to tell my employees all the time, perception is reality. If they perceive that you're not doing something, you're not doing something, So
Yeah, but going back to what you've accomplished in these last two developments is huge. But in the developers' minds, having worked with two of them now, is they look at it. The commercial space to them is just lost.
Absolutely,
It's right. So it's a cost of doing business. So if you require, you're not requiring; they're volunteering, which actually is a win-win. But if there's some things we can do to kind of structure that so that that's the case, they just look at it. Okay, well, Clemson's very sought after. This is a great investment for me. That's a cost of doing business. It's like buying land. So I'm setting it. I'm gonna. They'll be more willing to do that up front than they will be be to do it down the road.
Absolutely. And the good thing about them volunteering in the PD sense is that it's then codified into their ordinance, so they can't deviate. I mean, it's law. And I mean, I think the one that everyone always mentions to us constantly is Grand Mark because it is super visible. But, you know, and I think every one of those developments has sort of incrementally got better in terms of the retail portion of it. That one was just an early one that didn't have any of that in it. And to your point, there's the rents there are high, and it's not instead of
It's a tough place,
it's
too.
a tough place to get, but I do have the feeling, again, with the captive audience, if the rents were reasonable, those spaces would be filled. I could be wrong, but
I like this escrow. I mean, obviously, we see what Dockside's still just sitting there, and I know your situation there. You know, you outfitting it yourself. I like this escrow idea. The other thing I would encourage us to think about is taking some of the revenue off of that space. Let's say that your pie, he's paying some tax money, right, to the city, and somehow we get a percentage of that back into the escrow bucket, so that if he decides, you know, I want to go up the street here, then there's money reserved to help the next business that comes along to outfit that.
I like that.
Yeah, I know City of Easley's done that, where they have basically micro grant programs where every year they'll have a kind of like almost like a contest for a new business coming in, and you know, give them a small grant to help outfit their business. So
Yeah.
that is certainly something we can look into.
And I mean, you guys know better than I do. It was like when I was at the state level in Tennessee, the traditional economic development idea was manufacturing and industry. But when I was at the city level, it was retail and commercial and those other two. But, you know, so much of it's to your point, that's a good idea here, because so much of it's demographic based, and Clemson's demographics are weird because students skew it completely in terms of our average income and as well as our population flipping throughout the year. So I like that idea as a way to pour into it, to do a traditional like retail economic development attraction to go out and like seek people to fill the spaces. You could use that fund for that too.
I'm kind of convinced if we'd had an escrow amount that we'd probably have 2 or 3 more businesses in Dockside. I wouldn't just have a pizza choice.
Right.
But you're going to be getting
If the condo
golf
idea,
simulator brewery place pretty soon.
I heard that.
well, you know, and some of this is business attraction. There's a lot more pieces and parts than just planning and the PD. You know, it would be cheaper to business license wise to have a mine in Clemson than it is to have a financial advisor. You know, if you open a pit mine in Clemson city limits, you're Schedule 1. If you want to be a financial advisor, you're Schedule 7. So that doesn't make it. No one wants a mine in Clemson. We want, you know, services provided in Clemson. So I think in the long run, it might be. It looks like our schedule for business licenses was just copy and pasted from someplace else. You know, it might be something that the city needs to relook at, but that's not in your realm of
I've heard that
possibility.
said before. I don't know the ins and outs of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
all right. So what other, I mean, I kind of touched a few of the things that we were diving into. Did I miss any of the topics?
Well, it's one thing to move forward, and none of us are blind or deaf, but one of the major complaints for all of the new plan developments when we deviate from straight zoning is parking. And parking, we talk about parking in every single one of these meetings. And of course, you know, it's a negotiation when they come to you with a plan development. Zoning is already written, but it's something that definitely has to be. That's what people use against us. That's what the press uses against us. That's what the opponents use against us when we're trying to fix something new is parking, and it's legit. There's no allowance for a business in the city limits of Clemson to have a parking lot. It's just a parking lot. So when
Well, there is, but not in certain zoning districts.
yeah, that's right.
Having said that, is
Is that something you want us to look at? That's something we can
going to be
change.
pushed into
Yeah,
the
and it's the fact that on paper, you say that they're going to be
Because it'll turn.
1,400 beds
Parking for this
and
KOE development.
let's just say 700 units in the new one, and there's only going to be 600 parking spaces for residents. That's, any person that's against it's going to say, that's not enough. And where are the other people going to park? So that's something in future plan developments and future zoning discussions, is like, we got to have a park. If they can afford to live there, they can afford a car. And even if they can't park there, they're going to park somewhere. So now they're playing parking hunting. But
So just so that it's on the record, and I didn't want it to seem like a sidebar conversation, but in our work session, we're going to need to discuss enforcement of Abernathy Park parking, because it very likely could become auxiliary parking for the KOE Trail development.
and we
For
will also,
students who don't have a parking spot, or a friend that comes and they end up parking at the Abernathy Park, and
it'll also become the camper site.
yeah.
You know, the people that have been bumped out.
So
by-
that'll need to be added into our work session, so.
Or the 75 spots
At the new
one.
Kiwi
Yeah.
Trail. Yeah. But
I'm excited about the work session. Like she said, I'm just getting my feet wet in parking, but I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say. Yeah.
That's so bad for you.
Well, I think this is my sixth year.
Yeah.
Is this my
We've
sixth
been
year?
talking,
Yes.
parking has been on that list every
Going
day.
into
Yeah, I'm sure.
the next round, so.
I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
So you said that rent was expensive, which I agree, and it was something when we looked at opening here, that was one of the things that we found troubling, was it's more or less on par with downtown Greenville at any of the planned developments. Yet there's still vacancy in most of those. And my question is, why do you think that is? Because to me, if I own that property, I'm gonna lower my rent to fill it up, because it's marginal income at that point if I'm making my money elsewhere. Why?
Yeah,
There has to be
I can
some
kind of tell you
incentive to leave it.
what they've told me. You know, a lot of them say it's because they are trying to attract long-term tenants. They don't feel like doing tenants that are going to have a lot of turnover, that every, year they're gonna have someone else going on. And the type of they're looking for national brands, that type of thing, the tenants that can actually pay those rents that they're looking for. That's what they say is their performance set up, that they don't want to deal with it from like a year-to-year basis, that they're looking for long-term leases, and they think that they are weeding out the fly-by-nights by having the rents that high. That's their party line, whether it's true or not.
I mean, from my vantage point, Clemson has changed in that direction. I mean, you're more likely to see a Walgreens open than a mom and pop. And I mean, is that aligned with where the city wants that to be?
It's not what we want, but that is what these national organizations that own these student housing developments feel comfortable with.
Is that a more pressing reason to disincentivize them to leave it open? I mean, I don't know what the mechanism is. Maybe escrow does it. Maybe, I don't know if you can fine them for having vacant.
Well, not that it falls under your purview, but there's actually a trickle down, because in my lease, whenever it's renegotiated, it is based on a market analysis of rent. So it artificially inflates my rent.
absolutely.
Because it's calculated into that market assessment. So I don't know, I don't think your office would be the one to, I don't know how you answer that question or how you even address it, but it is a problem.
No, and I think that you guys wouldn't exist as a commission if, I think the fallacy is that there's an answer.
Yeah.
And there's not. I mean, it's definitely a shotgun. There's probably 10 answers of how to fix this, but I think the public misconception is, hey, if we just do this, all those will fill up, and that's not true. I can tell you from a recruiting, traditional commercial retail standpoint, I heard it in cities I was at before, I hear it here, like, why don't we have Trader Joe's? Well, I can tell you very clearly that if we had the income and population, we would have a Trader Joe's. Why don't we have a trampoline park or skating ring? If we could support those things, they would already be here. There's no, like, I hate to be crass, but like the days of like calling so-and-so and say, hey, you want to come to Clemson? Okay, they show up and they call you. Now there's some of that in the type of things you're talking about and I think there's a place for getting a really strong relationship with your local businesses and getting them in some of these developments. But then that trickles back into the same conversation that Doug's having of how do we get the rents appropriate to serve those folks. So There is not an answer, and I'm not gonna pretend that I have one, but there are probably 15 answers, and that's why we're glad you guys exist to figure them out. So.
And I think that what we're doing with the PDs, those, that's our best shot at it so far. We're gonna see how that works out, and then, obviously see if we can implement something similar into straight zoning, and, work that up the food chain to see if that's a viable option for us.
And we only have so much of this left.
Very little, yep.
I mean, we are hemmed in by the lake, the university, other municipalities. The state of South Carolina is not very interested in letting municipalities annex in across county lines. So we are hemmed in by 18 Mile Creek. The Milliken property obviously eventually will be done something with. But after that, there's no big chunks left. So it'll be either buy and raise and build new, or
Which to me would be a good thing.
yes, that facts. But there's definitely I'm not gonna say a urgency to it, but eventually we'll be built out.
Absolutely. We talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
Our commercial's tiny in the
Yeah.
city, tiny. When you look at it on a map and see how much of it is residential, how much is commercial, minuscule.
Yeah.
We have to be very careful. That's why, honestly, even if our commercial on our ground floors are vacant, in like, say as we build out the rest of College Ave, in the long term, they won't stay vacant, and it's definitely good practice to have them, built out as commercial now, rather than have them is residential, even if they would not fill up right this second. 'Cause someday they will.
It sounds like a catch-22. It's like the developers want the national, larger franchises and chains, but we don't necessarily have the population to support them.
And I don't think
And
that,
so, but that prices out your small business, mom and pop businesses.
and there's also a perception problem. I mean, if many of the people that are the permanent residents of the city of Clemson would not be happy if Clemson looked exactly like downtown Asheville, downtown Greenville, downtown Spartanburg. And that might be what the developers are wanting, because they're long-term leases and established brands. But Clemson still looks different than every other town. Whereas if you pick me up and put me in downtown Asheville and then knock me in the head and then put me in downtown Greenville, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference, But Clemson still looks different, but it's very hard, I think, for that mom and pop to get in here but that's not necessarily a zoning and planning problem. That's
Well, something else I can speak to is we're right on the cusp of, because I just thought of it because you mentioned Milliken property, which should, potentially break ground this summer, which that's another, several thousand houses, which will add to our population. And there are, in traditional recruiting, 20,000 is a trigger, and we're at 18 right now.
Yeah.
So we'll hit that 20,000, which will open us up to more. I mean, that's inevitable. 30,000 is a big trigger. You can attract a whole lot more than 30,000. And I'm not saying that's the trend we're going, but we'll inevitably hit 20.
and as we do grow, and like I said, we only have a finite amount left, and everyone in the city that votes, that our population full-time, that they are going to throw 123 at us as a problem, traffic, access, blah, blah, blah. So as we move forward, and I'm going to say this out loud, but it's unfixable. We can't fix it. That's just the way life is. But when we move, as the city grows and develops further out, we really need to think about 93, 76, Issaquah Trail, Pendleton Road, turn lanes, bus pullouts, infrastructure, limited driveway access. These are the things that need to go into planning and zoning, because when someone wants to build a new development on, let's just say 93, we need to all of a sudden say, you've got to, in your budget, we're going to have a right turn lane. It needs to be 3/4 of the length of your property. This is where we're going to install lights, because the perception problem is what causes the outcry,
Absolutely. Well, I think you're spot on with that, because 93, we do not want to turn into another Tiger Boulevard.
And we can still fix 93.
Exactly. Right now, it is not developed, what it will be someday.
Yeah.
And what you said is limited highway access. Number of driveways coming onto there, that's the biggest problem with Tiger Boulevard, is everyone having no frontage road and everyone having their own driveway. It is our issue.
Yeah.
All right, so the agenda topic, just to summarize, was to have you come and educate us on what the rules of the game are.
Okay, yep.
And I think we learned a few things. What we all thought as well is after we learned a little bit of that, we wanted to determine if there was a working session we could have to talk about what could we recommend as potential changes. And I think you said, I think there were 3 different categories. One was what we require developers to do on the front end. 2 is the potential condoization idea. Maybe it's an education process that, you know, it already is, we can already do that, right? What was the 3rd?
For the work session with the parking,
Well, no, just relative to what?
escrow,
Yeah, an escrow account, requiring developers to provide something as a minimum, and then putting a structure in place around it, going into an escrow so that it would be a win-win. And then the other element was the tax piece, and there was an idea, and that was if you can, and the way to cordon it off is that they would be condos instead of a part of the structure. That was the summary, I think. Did I miss anything?
No, I mean, that's the fun stuff for us. We'll dig in for
All
sure.
right, good deal. Well,
I
we
have a
appreciate you
question,
guys. Yeah.
Totally off topic, but since none of you are here, I've been reading a lot about the changes in our liquor liability laws in the states. How's that affected, as we're primarily a hospitality, city? How's that affecting you guys?
I make less money now because we're busier and I make less money now. Because
So it's been dramatic.
my costs have gone up.
We're about to enter the 3rd year with our carrier, but when we tried to get insurance, and this is before this became a big issue, there were only 2 carriers that were interested in offering it, and it was almost like an arms race to see how expensive they could make it.
That's true.
Because we have not had a claim in 2 years. They did give us and I think they think that the state will change it in the next 2 years because they offered us a 3-year policy.
Okay.
But we have it, and the only reason ours is still affordable, I think, is because our proportion of food is much higher than we initially thought it was going to be, but it's still outrageously expensive.
And even for a small,
Yeah, because that's not your
I mean,
favorite thing.
I'm 96% food.
Yep.
My rates went up 20-30%. Overall business insurance, and the component that's gone up is the liquor liability.
And the liquor liability is only a small amount of my liability. I mean, it's not a small amount of my liability, but it's only one portion. I have other liability insurance to cover other things, but it's astronomical.
Okay.
It's another thing that makes, we are an entertainment hospitality, and the reason there will never be a music venue, I don't think, in Clemson as long as this liquor liability law is in effect, because if you were to open up a music venue, which is what people ask about, they ask me about it all the time, why do we not have like a concert venue, a performing arts place? Most of their sales are liquor and booze, and they just can't afford the liability, because you're only making money 3 days a week at best,
Now, is that something worth your organization sending a letter to our state rep saying, change this?
I've talked to my state rep many times.
Okay. Maybe the city of Clemson.
I think
The city wanted to weigh in on that, though.
I'm just saying, is it something worth the city saying, hey, this affects us dramatically because of just what type of business we are, the city of Clemson?
And
Should we send something up to them?
there's 4 solutions to it, none of which will ever be. You can repeal the law, which will never happen. You can allow people to buy insurance in a nationwide pool. So instead of just 2 carriers, you could get a rider from Nevada because they have a huge amount of carriers there. You could require every citizen in the state to carry $1 million rider because citizens are the people who make mistakes. Or you could let the businesses write off their entire liability insurance from their tax base. But none of those things will ever happen. So.
Okay, moving on. Recommendations to council, I think will come after our work session, so we'll figure out a work session as soon as we adjourn. Any other business, old or new?
Is this,
Oh, yeah,
so I've closed the Bounty Man. So technically, I don't have a business now, so I shouldn't, I guess you need to replace me.
So we're gonna have to replace Mr. Bennett.
I cannot change the bylaws of the committee. So we need to, I guess,
Nominate?
do we nominate somebody or does someone have to apply?
We'll have to post for the position or the seat. and accept applications.
It's been
We're
fun.
grateful for your service.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, John. Glad to do it.
Kill it in Greenville.
Hope to keep killing it here, but just out of the house. So.
Yeah.
Do you still have the van?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Doing events?
Yeah.
You gonna go to the music fest?
No.
Neither is anyone else.
I'm gonna try.
Are you?
Yeah.
All right. Good job. All right, so there's that.
All right, well, no, before we adjourn, need to pick the work session
Okay.
date. I just meant that we could push it to the end of the meeting.
All right, so when's our next meeting? Maybe the 21?
I'm available.
Parking lot, I mean, that's the new dockside parking lot.
What time?
12:30.
12:30. Okay.
All right.
I don't know that's new business still. No, it's new business. We've mentioned in the past, and I think
If nothing further, going once, twice?
adjourn.